Ugly is wrong. It's shameful, it's humiliating and pitiable and disgusting. But help is out there.
Now, if you start to notice when you make lines like this, it might be time to consider a little bit of a preventative Botox.
Try this diet.
Louise and Carly will be swapping diets for 5 days.
Define your jawline, build muscle.
Good. You will rise to the challenge or you will leave.
Take Ozempic. Dress for your body type.
The puffy sleeves and the really fitness of the top actually makes you look like you've got a chest, which is really positive.
Suck in those rolls.
I got a back bump from my wedding.
Love yourself, but improve yourself. Get lip filler, dissolve your lip filler, fix your flaws. Make sure you always look 5 years younger than you are, 10 years younger. Beauty is value, youth is power. Aging is reversible and body fat is a moral failure. If the right diet, workout, surgery or style exists, why haven't you cracked the code? Why aren't you beautiful yet?
It sounds like you need an image change.
This endless pursuit of beauty isn't just exhausting, it's weaponized. Every ad, every influencer, every trend feeds us the same lie, that beauty is happiness. But more than that, the ugliness is unworthy.
Some guy said no one would ever love me because of my yellow dolphin teeth.
Unworthy of confidence, unworthy of respect.
I love that.
Unworthy of kindness.
My question to you is, why do you think that you're so bothered by a stranger's appearance on the internet?
The obsession and shame around ugliness that we now have can be traced back to the makeover shows of the 2000s, where we were taught that being ugly wasn't just undesirable, it was unforgivable.
What is it going to take for you to make that
That
change?
beauty isn't just a personal goal, but a social duty. What if the real makeover was happening to us? Warping and controlling not just our bodies, but our minds.
Because I chose not to wear foundation today doesn't mean I need your full skincare routine.
Transforming our perceptions of beauty and ugliness themselves.
No, you are orange.
This is how 2000s TV made being ugly the ultimate sin, and why we are still paying the price. In this video, we are going to be diving into the truly dystopian worlds of 5 makeover and transformation shows which aired in the 2000s. Bulging Brides, The Biggest Loser, Snog, Marry, Avoid, and 10 Years Younger in 10 Days. Each of these shows is built around a different tactic to enforce our cultural messages of beauty and ugliness, and by revealing these methods, we'll start to break down their lies. Our cultural fear of ugliness is something that doesn't really need an introduction. We're all intimately familiar with it. It's the very thing that drives the beauty industry. It's the teen girl crying because she thinks she'll never be desired or loved because of her looks. It's the instinct to correct someone when they call themselves ugly, even if they don't want that reassurance. It's the history of ordinances nicknamed the Ugly Laws in America in the 1800s and 1900s, which made it a crime to exist in public while maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed, so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object. And it's the current research into the experiences of perceived ugliness, including negative impacts on careers, being less favoured by jurors, even being treated more harshly from birth. It's the tools of enforcing a cultural obsession with beauty, which became televised entertainment less than 2 decades ago, with legacies that we're about to see are alive and well today. Before we dive in, I have a wildly exciting piece of news to share with you, which you no doubt will have spotted already behind me. I have been working for many months now on a collaboration with the incredible queer illustrator Philippa Namorado on this limited edition queer movie art print, which showcases 25 iconic LGBTQ+ films, my favourite 25 in fact. There are classic scenes and well-loved characters and hidden references and Easter eggs. I've had this idea of creating something which celebrated queer cinema and storytelling for a long time, and this image of a found family, like queer community house, kept coming back to me. So when I came across Philippa's art, I knew that we had to make this happen. So if you like the look of the print, then it is on sale from today for 1 month until the 4th of March, and you can order it in any of these 3 sizes. The link to check it out is, of course, in the description, and the first 200 prints will have the option of being signed editions. Plus, we thought it would be fun to add a little mini game to the site where you can try and spot all the movies featured in the illustration. So let me know in the comments if you managed to guess them all. Super size versus super skinny, humiliation and shame. Both humiliation and shame are powerful methods of enforcing the divide between beauty and goodness on one side and ugliness and immorality on the other. This might mean demanding shame from those who don't meet a certain set of visual requirements for their bodies, and encouraging them to see the very act of appearing in public being perceived by other people as a form of humiliation. It works so well because it enforces the belief in ugliness and every type of way of looking that surrounds ugliness as a state of inherent and constant sadness. Not just that it's an objectively bad thing to be, but that you should feel shame for being ugly or fat or unkempt, and to be anything other than being ashamed is to be delusional, dangerous even, encouraging this state in others. And no show utilised these methods better than Super Size vs Super Skinny, a British show which aired from 2008 to 2014. The very heart of the format was turning this particular tactic into entertainment for the masses. They made no secret of the aim to humiliate and shame the participants of the show, and it's baked into every segment of each episode. Episodes pair together two people, each on one end of the body weight spectrum. One super size, the other super skinny, as the title suggests, and they followed them as they lived together for a week and swapped diets. Let me run you through how these episodes went. First, we're introduced to our two unfortunate subjects. They're each dressed only in underwear with their bodies on full display, and the camera cuts quickly between close-up shots of different parts of their respective bodies. A voiceover tells us their name, occupation, and their body weight and measurements. Here the process begins with a dehumanizing snapshot of these people as bodies to be observed and judged. The two are then filmed meeting for the first time, still in their underwear. There's this veneer in the show of being some kind of like scientific exercise in helping these people. They refer to the house where the participants stay for the start of filming as the food clinic, and the show is hosted by a doctor, Christian Jensen, although he isn't a doctor of nutrition or weight or anything like that. And they include stats each episode about things like population health. Yet for all the initial appearance of the show as some kind of factual experiment only trying to help, it doesn't take long for this to crumble under the underlying decision to prioritize this shaming and humiliation within every aspect of the show. Take, for example, the first episode of season 2, where we're introduced to supersizer Philippa with the line,
"But when it comes to grub guzzling, this nosher just can't seem to get enough."
Does this seem like a description of a participant in a sound scientific study or an empathetic attempt at understanding even? No. After the two participants meet, they're brought to a stark white room where Dr. Jensen shows them each their average weekly food and drink consumption. He does this using perhaps the most infamous crystallization of this commitment to humiliation and shame, a clear plastic tube. Each meal, snack, and drink is tipped into the top of the tube by a hidden crew member and splatters down to the bottom into a growing pile. Sandwiches fall apart before they reach that bottom, become soggy mush. Appetizing meals like soup or curry take on a new implication when poured and slopped onto a week's worth of other food, spraying the size of the tube with cold, thick liquid. And both subjects' reactions are captured as Jensen gives a running commentary on everything wrong with what he's seeing, while the calorie counts flash in huge letters and numbers on the screen. I just need us all to fully comprehend the decision to do this on national television, to take the concept of sharing a week's worth of food to give a sense of the contrast between two people's diets, and be so consumed with the idea that this show would be at its most popular and entertaining if it pushed what could have just been 2 tables with the food normally prepared onto it into the most shaming and viscerally disgusting extreme that they could imagine. Not satisfied with using the editing and built-in segments to shame the participants, the show's central conceit of having the two swap diets includes them sitting down to eat together every day, a method that often seemed to encourage them to comment on the food in front of them in contrasting and judgmental ways. The super skinny person who, let's be honest, often had some form of eating disorder themselves, when confronted with a large portion of food and a crowd watching them trying to eat it, would verbalize their own negative thoughts but project them onto the other person. Their internal feelings of disgust became comments on how disgusting that other participant's food habits were, and in many ways how disgusting their counterpart was themselves. And crucially, any unhealthy food attitudes expressed to themselves go unchecked on screen. The show positioned the idea of watching as someone with a real fear of food was forced to gag down more than what they are comfortable with, or the other participant essentially starving themselves for a week. It's like fun entertainment. Over the years, the show had a number of parallel segments to this central story of two participants swapping diets. In some, the supersizer was confronted with what the show called Letters from America, film segments of morbidly obese Americans directly addressing them with dire warnings about how miserable and hellish their lives are as fat people. For the women, these often included warnings about how their weight would affect their ability to be a good mother and a good wife. Being fat and being ugly are treated as one and the same by this show. The supersizers need to lose weight to be worthy of their partners or to be able to love them properly. There's also an unmistakable element of classism within many of these segments. One academic paper written about the show pointing out the connection between these elements. The socioeconomic security of the British supersizers contrasts with the precarity of the Americans, displayed through the poverty of mobile homes, unemployment, and disability benefits. This linking of morbid obesity and poverty informs the alarmist imaginings of mothering on the programme. Letting one's children go fat is akin to adopting an anti-aspirational stance and becoming bad citizens. These obesity-focused programs portray working-class parents as ignorant, self-indulgent, irresponsible, in denial, and in dire need of education, such that it becomes the duty of the show and the state to shame them into self-surveillance and discipline. The encouraged humiliation of being in a fat body is compounded by the imagined humiliation of lowered class status and the shame of failing at proper gender too. These methods of shame are seen as justified because they are going to get these people close to possession of a body worthy of respect. The episodes end with the two subjects going away to live their normal lives with personalised eating plans that one journalist, Claire Stevens, has described pretty aptly. What's in the eating plan, you might ask? No one knows. It's never communicated, just that it's personalised, with the aim of that person gaining or losing weight. To clarify, we are shown in great detail the wrong way to eat, but the doctor-endorsed right way to eat is private. Everything about this show is about making these people suffer, both physically and psychologically, in the name of achieving a perfect weight. Again and again, the show gives us stories of people who are clearly dealing with other issues, toxic generational relationships with food, using starvation as a coping mechanism for other traumas, devastating experiences of self-hatred. Yet the idea of therapy to address these issues is brushed over with the idea that if these people just looked how they were supposed to, it would sort out their problems. And possibly the wildest thing about this show is that they made a kids version where they did the same thing to actual children. I found one person who participated in the show as an adult who wrote a comment on a blog post addressing the role of editing and publicity in the program that I found really interesting. You have no choice on how you appear, and often things are exaggerated with producers asking you to pile more on the plates. Not only that, but they chop and change your food diary around and also edit it so your days are mixed. The show forwarded a magazine onto us who completely twisted the truth, lied, and frankly humiliated my family and I. I sort of felt betrayed by the show. It might be televised, but it's my life. They also gave the magazine shots of me in my underwear that I was told were private and only for producers and crucial people to see. And at this point, if there are any people still watching thinking, well, obviously it's harsh, but some of these people were unhealthy, right? And this kind of tough love is what these people need to change their ways. I need you to understand that even if we gave this show a huge benefit of the doubt, that it was all about health and helping people and like the very clear beauty aspect wasn't really a part of it, humiliation and shame as methods of change, they don't even work. We've seen so many studies, pieces of research, personal testimonies that show that fatphobic shaming does not lead in any meaningful way to weight loss. One 4-year study of over 3,000 people from UCL, for example, found that weight stigma and discrimination increase the chances of weight gain due to the social factors associated with this kind of shaming, including shaming from medical professionals. Another study of children in the US found, among youths with or at risk for overweight and obesity, weight-based teasing was associated with greater weight and fat gain. Similarly, we see the impact of the show on viewers who are struggling to gain weight. It's become almost a meme in online spaces for those in eating disorder recovery that, far from being an inspirational show for them to improve their relationship with food, Super Size vs Super Skinny became a blueprint for disordered eating. I usually watch it when I'm doing exercises or feel bad if I ate too much, says Sophia, a 16-year-old recovering anorexic who was diagnosed at 14. 3 years ago, Sophia started watching the show on YouTube, where most episodes now illegally live. The teenager explains that she compares her body, food intake and BMI with the show's Super Skinnies. According to guidelines issued by eating disorder charity Beat, the media should refrain from showing severely emaciated bodies, as the show frequently did. I know that's super toxic and triggering, Sophia admits of her time watching the show. It used to make me want to eat less. These shows' focus on improvement is not a neutral helping hand because it relies on denigrating the original person, their body and their character. Shaming other people for their own bodies, which ultimately have nothing to do with you, it's not some public service. It's people projecting their own fears and sense of moral superiority onto others. Fatness, along with perceived ugliness, has long been socially connected to other unrelated negative attributes. Someone who's fat or ugly is also, by association, undisciplined, lazy or unintelligent. We see it in the way that foods themselves are connected to morality, the angelic image of low-fat food versus the naughty, guilty pleasure options. For many people who feel the urge to shame and humiliate others for their bodies, there's a feeling of being better than them, not just looking better, but being a better person. I think ultimately this impulse to shame and humiliate is about fear. People fear what is perceived as ugliness. They fear being seen as ugly themselves. They want to distance themselves from it, to push people who embody it away, to dehumanize those deemed within its boundaries. We saw it in the freak show circuses throughout history, the separation of those deemed ugly and disfigured into the realm of the monstrous. They were neutralized into something to be jeered at, giggled over. Ugliness was contained and commodified. What is super size versus super skinny and shows like it but a 2000s resurgence of the freak show, no longer a travelling caravan, but a televised spectacle to be enjoyed in the comfort of your living room. And it continues today. Perceived ugliness now makes people the property of public discussion on a global scale through social media. Think of the number of times that you'll have seen unsolicited and negative comments on TikToks or Reels that include people outside of the beauty standard. Videos that are nothing to do with looks even, someone just going about their day. There's this casual cruelty, I think, that we often see online, which it might be tempting to think of as just one or two one-off trolls, but I think there's a much more widespread type of freedom and entitlement that people feel in online spaces to make these kind of comments. I think about the number of times that myself or friends of mine have replied to rude or mean comments on our content, and that person has responded seemingly shocked that we have seen the comment at all, and especially that we might have been affected by it. Often there's an apology, but it's more an apology that we saw it than that it was made in the first place. But you also have people who double down, who act like pointing out that they think that someone's nose is too big or their hair is thinning or their fat is helping them actually, that it's tough love and necessary. There's comments on videos of happy couples about how crazy people find that these two are together because of how much these strangers commenting perceive them as mismatched in terms of levels of attractiveness. Things like, we're all thinking it, this can't be real, dude must have lost a bet. There's this one account which I love to watch in particular called Plus Size Park Hoppers. Their whole account is a great resource for people looking to go to theme parks and attractions who are plus sized, who aren't sure if certain rides or restaurants will be accessible to them. It's really lovely. It's always fun to see this group of friends like enjoying each other's company, but also it's this extremely specific form of like citizen journalism in a really, really particular niche that I find really interesting. However, from that description, I don't think I need to tell you what the comment section can look like. And the fact that you already know when I said that says something, right? About how we all know how people who fall outside the concept of acceptable appearance are treated on and offline. Literally, as I've been working on this script, there's this new meme that's popped up around how you can like spot a polyamorous person because they all look the same, as essentially a way of calling people ugly without using that exact word. As many people have pointed out, if someone conventionally attractive talked about the same topics, the reaction would be very different, most likely, in most cases. You know, do you need another boyfriend? Manifesting this of 2025, like lucky girls. Unsolicited body commentaries are the basis of entire genres on these apps. Users giving their own friendly advice commentary over screenshots of other users onto how they can improve their looks, or fat shaming what I eat in a day video reviews. You can see how used to this unwanted commentary people have become by the number of people who feel that they need to specify that they do not want people to do it to them, like in their video captions. I follow this user Emma for a while now, and it's depressingly predictable that she feels the need to start her videos with the tagline,
"What I eat in a day is a fat bitch who very controversially doesn't give a fuck that she's fat,"
as a kind of preemptive protection against hateful comments. This kind of, well, you can't hurt me, actually, disclaimer to discourage her own abuse. I think a lot of people would look at clips from this show nowadays and say, like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's kind of laughable. That's like wild what they could get away with in the 2000s. That could never happen now. But the truth is, like, it is happening now. It just looks a bit different. Biggest Loser, punishment and dehumanization. There is this pervasive idea that any treatment doled out in the pursuit of improving the way that someone looks, be it their weight or their skin or any number of other supposed flaws, is justifiable. That taunts are just facts, that judgment and criticism are kindness, and that dehumanizing television is entertainment. The Biggest Loser is an 18-season nightmare that seems determined to justify just about anything. Of all the weight loss shows on TV, The Biggest Loser probably had the most dramatic results. The side-by-side photos showing contestants before and after their weight loss are shocking. They almost look like two different people. But the show is also known for its cruelty. Trainers force contestants to exercise until they vomit or faint. Contestants eating under 1,000 calories a day constantly say over and over how much they hate themselves, how disgusting they are.
I actually don't know how I stumbled across The Biggest Loser, but I think the draw at a horrifically young age, like I'm talking like 10 years old, I remember being obsessed with this show. Like Gillian Michaels was my god, my superhero. And I think I probably got hooked into the idea of punishment, like that you deserve to be. It was the people throwing up in the gym that I remember. And then looking at the people who weren't throwing up in the gym and going, you're not trying hard enough.
But when you're watching The Biggest Loser, you're not just watching suffering, you're watching atonement. Fatness in the show is a sinful state. Each episode literally features a temptations challenge in which players must resist unhealthy foods or the opportunity to avoid exercise. Their very bodies are evidence of their past failures, and the show tells us that they need to be reminded of those failures constantly. To be fat is to be bad in so many ways in the world of this show. It's to be sinful, to be lazy, and above all, to be ugly. Now, there are many video essays and articles online breaking down how horrible this show was, but when it was first released, many viewers, like Michelle, felt like the contestants deserved their treatment. But why? There's this great scene in the UK TV show My Mad Fat Diary, where in a fantasy, the main character Ray unzips her skin and a skinny version of herself steps out of her old fat body. After admiring herself in the mirror, Ray drags her old body down the stairs outside and lights it on fire. This separation between your fat self and your skinny self is quite common in the way that we conceive of body weight. In Shrill, a personal trainer tells Annie, A.D. Bryant's character, that there's a thin person inside of her dying to get out. Writer Lindy West explained in one interview, the way that we're taught to think about fatness is that fat is not a permanent state. You're just a thin person who's failing consistently for your whole life. The fat self acts as a jailer to the thin self. After Shonda Rhimes, creator of Grey's Anatomy, lost weight, she was shocked by how differently people perceived her. After I lost weight, I discovered that people found me valuable, worthy of conversation, a person one could look at, a person one could compliment, a person one could admire, a person, you heard me. I discovered that now people saw me as a person. What the hell did they see me as before? How invisible was I to them then? How hard did they work to avoid me? What words did they use to describe me? What value did they put on my presence at a party, a lunch, a discussion? When I was fat, I wasn't a person to these people, like I had been an invisible woman who suddenly materialized in front of them. Poof, there I am, thin and ready for a chat. This separation of identity, thin you and fat you, justifies the kinds of cruel behaviour used on The Biggest Loser. Fatness cannot exist in a neutral state. Fatness is presented as a form of self-abuse, one that can only be cured by abusing the abuser. Essentially, they have to kill their fat selves so that their skinny selves can live. As the contestants on The Biggest Loser collapse from starvation and exhaustion and vomit on the gym floor, all whilst trainers yell at them to push through, to be better, it evokes the image of an exorcism. This narrative also encourages us to differentiate these contestants from bad fat people who aren't trying to lose weight.
I think ugly is scary because ugliness is so connected to belonging and lack of belonging. I think that people don't want to call themselves ugly because they are afraid that they are saying, I am ugly, so it's okay to treat me a certain way. I'm ugly, so it's okay to look over me. It's okay to exclude me. It's okay to not treat me as a member of the community who deserves safety, protection, love, and full existence. It's terrifying. I think ugly is still so moralized. We really equate value, human value, based off of beauty. We hierarchalize people based off of beauty, and nobody wants to be at the bottom of that hierarchy.
Nowadays, The Biggest Loser was harmful, actually, is the opposite of a hot take. Former contestants have come forward to discuss the physical and mental abuse that they endured. There are several videos on YouTube where people react to early seasons of the show with horror. But despite this criticism, I think that the ethos of The Biggest Loser lives on. For one, people sure are comfortable talking about strangers' bodies on the internet. If you're fat and have a social media presence, the chances are that you will get comments from people that you do not know about your body, and they won't be positive. Or maybe a stranger will film you at the gym, or maybe someone will take a video that you posted and put it in a fat people cringe compilation on YouTube. The sentiment behind these behaviours is one of disgust. How can someone let themselves get this way? Why are they not fighting to kill their fat self so their skinny self can thrive? Before and after images of extreme weight loss continue to pull numbers on social media, and fitness and diet regimes that create that drastic loss continue to attract participants. Challenges like 75 Hard, a 75-day fitness challenge, have spread like wildfire online. The language around this challenge ties into this idea of fatness as an outward manifestation of an inner weakness, or that the fit you is the better you. The full title of the program is 75 Hard, a tactical guide to winning the war with yourself. On the 75 Hard website, Andy Frisilla, the creator of the challenge, writes, "I realized that the root cause of all of my problems was not addressed by any existing program, because the real problem I had was a lack of mental toughness and discipline." The program, Andy claims, isn't about weight loss, it's Iron Man for your brain. And yet, part of the program requires you to take a new photo of your body every day so you can document this transformation. TikTok and Reddit are full of these transformation photos, and we're encouraged to praise the progress, the improvement, the losses, and the gains, but why? According to the website, it's because the picture on the right, the after picture, is the superior person, not just physically, but mentally and socially too. It seems to me that this pervasive idea that the skinnier version of you is the more beautiful version of you, it's the better version of you, the more attractive version of you, it's so pervasive that even a challenge where the creator has said that it isn't about appearance still manages to make it about appearance in many ways. But the truth is that if your body looks like the before image, you aren't morally obligated to chase your own after photo. The most ripped version of you isn't a better person than who you are right now. A skinnier version of you doesn't matter more, and a fatter version of you doesn't matter less. And it certainly doesn't mean that you'll make huge strides in your career or learn to be honest with yourself. We need to stop treating ourselves and others like fatness signifies anything other than fatness. We see this same dehumanization tactic used against those perceived as ugly for a whole host of other reasons too. People who don't conform to gender norms, for example, especially if they could fit those norms if they wanted to, are also reacted to with this same kind of disgust and fear. I came across this post of Shiloh Jolie while researching for this video. It's a slideshow of pictures of her at different ages. We see her as a younger kid, presenting more like a typical boy of that age with shorter hair at a time when she went by the name John, before getting to the penultimate slide where she's now photographed at an event with long hair and delicate makeup that are kind of like the perfect feminine girl her age might have. But then the final slide shows Shiloh now with a more androgynous look, with a shaved haired pastel pink dye and no makeup to speak of. I think that the comments demonstrate this dehumanization depressingly well. What is it, they ask? I'm confused. Strangers looking at someone whose gender presentation isn't what they can fit into a neat box. The final slide is ugly to them. A shame or a waste, with the implication being that if Shiloh had kept up the feminine presentation, then the label of ugly would be removed and her treatment would be totally different, even though she is the exact same person in each of those slides. Snog, marry, avoid. Assimilation. The next method that I want to talk about is the trend of limiting or defining beauty in very specific ways. Ugliness is therefore expanded to mean anything outside of a constructed norm. It's ugly to be different. It's ugly to refuse to assimilate. The 2000s gave us this idea in televised form with the show Snog, Marry, Avoid, which aired from 2008 to 2013 on BBC Three in the UK. The name sort of gives away the format of the show, but let's walk through a typical episode, shall we? We're introduced, often in a getting ready montage, to someone that the show deems to be presenting themselves in an ugly or unacceptable way. These contestants are sometimes heavily into an alternative subculture like goth or punk. Other times they are seen as too concerned with the wrong kind of beautification, fake tan and bleach blonde hair, for example, which is derided as fake by the show. So the host of the show greets the contestant and, after a brief chat, sends them off to a fictional make-under robot named Pod, or personal overhaul device, who analyses and comments on the contestant's appearance. Pod's voice is clearly that of a woman, and she pretty much universally condemns the contestants put in front of her. The comments and questions from Pod range from sarcastic to outright insulting, as the camera cuts between multiple shots of the offending contestant, zooming in on their hair, their makeup, and overall outfit. Almost all the contestants are young women, and it is clear from the outset that a lot of the judgment from Pod, and therefore the producers of the show, is based in how well they conform to an appropriate and mainstream performance of their gender. They can't be too feminine or sexual of their own accord, but they also shouldn't be unattractive or garish. They shouldn't use too much glamour makeup, but they also shouldn't use makeup in acts of artistic self-expression. Pod then shows a clip of the contestant to men on the street, asking them the fateful question, would you snog, marry, or avoid this girl? And tells the contestant her results. The implication being that you want them all to say marry, because that means that you have successfully performed a desirable but not too promiscuous version of womanhood. You are a woman worthy of respect. Pod then begins the transformation, or so-called make-under, to remove the fakery of the contestants. In the 2000s, special effects magically transformed them from before to after, where makeup is reapplied in demure neutrals, piercings are removed, tattoos are covered, and clothes replaced with respectable alternative outfits. The contestant's personality and individualism is cast aside in favour of the natural beauty within. At this point, they repeat the interviews with random men on the street, and lo and behold, most of them decide that they now want to marry her. Episodes finish with the reveal of the new look to family or friends and their shocked reactions, and the final image that we are left with is the host reuniting with them a few months later to see if they have kept Pod's look. The implication to the audience in these final moments is often that if they've reverted back to their before lifestyle, then this is a case of a sort of lost cause who is pitiable or someone to be laughed at. The premise of Pod is fascinating because it couches itself in the language of 2000s feminism, as if they were programmed for social good. Pod is helping these people. Pod is getting rid of fakeness and celebrating natural beauty. It's this idea of choice feminism, right? Where it's your choices that make you feminist rather than anything sort of systemic going on. It's also your choices that can oppress you. It's your choices which mean that something is wrong with you and that justify people treating you badly. In fact, looking back on the show, it's clear that often what is being removed are markers of class, of queerness, of identity and personality. Pod still uses makeup and hairstyling during the make-under, but does it in a way that conforms with white, straight, middle-class ideas of what beauty is and what ugliness is. The class anxiety of the UK is clear in the dreaded accusations of chav against contestants who are seen as too much, attaching the idea of vulgarity and classlessness to their ugly appearance as well as their accent and demeanour. Michelle and I spoke about the ways that shows like this use desirability as a yardstick for beauty and ugliness, in this case with asking men on the street their thoughts on contestants' bodies as a marker of their success.
If we're still focusing on bodies, we're still losing. So yes, you want to believe you're beautiful, you want to look good naked, blah, blah, blah. But actually, I think 90% of women, at least heteronormative women, if you say look good naked, you kind of finish that sentence with for a man. It's like look good naked in the bedroom from the dating lens, which is that attraction can't be that fragile. Because if you look at a long-term relationship, I put in the selfish romantic that my ex-fiance had seen me throwing up after a night out, throwing up after food poisoning, after an eye surgery where I wasn't allowed to shower for 4 days. And if his attraction to me was so fragile, it would have been gone the moment. But then when it comes to dating, we try to like strong arm it and try to make sure they see us as attractive at all times. And actually there's a thing I talk about in my TED Talk where one of my friends wouldn't ever let her boyfriend see her makeup free. And that meant she used to go to the bathroom before he woke up, put her makeup on, and then like sneak back into bed. And it used to make me so heartbroken because I was like, you're actually not letting them see the real you, that like it's still a mask to an extent. And it's things where if you look at, for example, last week, I talked on social media about how I went to an event makeup free, and it's taking off a little bit on TikTok, and some of the comments are like horrific.
We can see in the examples of women who are constantly trying to construct a sense of beauty and desirability around themselves, the frantic nature of fear at the heart of that endeavour. Because in our society, the stakes around beauty are more than skin deep. Other people's perceptions of the ways that you look affect how they treat you. Yet we see with the application of subtle makeup how pod is enforcing this socially policed lie of naturalness as superior because of its proximity to beauty. Because these make-unders still involve artifice. They still involve makeup and hair dye and buying new clothes. Pretty in the world of pod is a set of skills. It's mastering natural makeup. It's picking the right clothes for your colouring and the shape of your body. It's plucking your eyebrows just enough to flatter your face. It's about making an effort, if the effort is to assimilate into mainstream ideals of respectable female beauty. It's keeping up to date with what is even considered pretty in this time and this moment. As Dr. Julie Shiel explains, to think that how we perceive what is sexy or whom we find attractive is based on rational thought is naive. The primitive brain tends to drive this proverbial bus, but our primitive brain is under constant assault and control by our culture. A journalist with Days magazine spoke to a number of past contestants on the show. Their experiences are depressingly predictable. One contestant, Martha, said that producers chased her for 6 months before she agreed to participate, under the pretense that the program aimed to celebrate individuality. I was so excited going to film, but I came back broken. And then I saw it on TV and was even more broken. A Selfridges makeup artist at the time and now a glamour model, Martha was repeatedly compared to a drag queen by the public. Her make-under was nicknamed Arthur to Martha. They gave me a bob and called me natural, but my hair was full of extensions. They made us all look the same. It wasn't a pleasant experience at all. It hurt my relationship, it made me feel vulnerable, and it completely destroyed my self-esteem. The experience even pushed her to cosmetic surgery. I was already being called fake, so I just thought, why not go and get lip filler? Why not go and get my boobs done? Some of my friends who also went on have had trouble finding employment because of it. It's just awful. Another woman, Emily, told them that she went to the toilet to put her piercings back in and goth makeup back on once filming ended. Even in the hour of having the make-under done, a piece of my identity was taken away. I think that's why I went even more extreme afterwards, because I never wanted to feel like that again. Like Martha, the show was sold to Emily as a celebratory series. I feel sorry for myself when I watch it. I guess I felt set up in a way. This tactic of encouraging a universal assimilation into what is deemed beautiful and a rejection of what is seen as ugly is far from over. The pod make-under has paved the way for the clean girl aesthetic online. I think we can see in the phenomenon of aesthetics in general, these style-centric surface-level subcultures, a modern menu of types of beauty to be assimilated into. Subcultures which predate this modern trend, like punks or hippies, often had particular clothing and styles associated with them. But they also had connections beyond that, political beliefs, community identities, and socializing spaces. Norms different to the typical mainstream culture. The modern idea of cause as a tagged-on ending to anything that can become a purely visual aesthetic attempt at a subculture is the perfect example of perhaps the worst part of this technique of assimilation in defining beauty. and that is that it's changeable. Microtrends in fashion and beauty are rife, churning through at a rate impossible before the advent of social media. What was beautiful at the start of a season is now ugly at the end. It's an unsustainable way to exist in ourselves, and yet so many of us chase its approval. I think the new trend online of talking about beauty blindnesses is a particularly Gen Z example of this, where people look at old photos of themselves when they have popular makeup looks or beauty ideals from the time, and the time could be like a year ago, or even less, and they point out something about it that now seems wrong or cringe or ugly. Eyebrow blindness for the thicker, blockier eyebrows of the late 2010s being one of the most talked about. This trend doesn't acknowledge that, like, hey, this seems very arbitrary. At the time when this look was popular, we didn't think that this looked bad. It's just our perception that's changed. And maybe that perception is too steeped in judgment and a never-ending race to relevant perfection that doesn't exist. And probably we'll look back in 3 years at some new beauty blindness that's happening in this video, and then this will start all over again. But instead, these videos cringing over eyebrow blindness seem to inevitably end with the reassurance of the person has seen the error of their ways and they're now conforming to current acceptable shaping of their over-eye hairs. They have become their own personal overhaul device. I just wanted to quickly take a minute to thank returning sponsor Skillshare for supporting the channel, but also for helping me draw my new sons Orange and Gebbett. Maybe I was a little inspired by working with Philippa on the poster, but I've also been struggling with finding time for non-work related creativity, so I decided to try the Skillshare class Kickstart Your Creativity, where she takes you through beginner exercises to learn the basics of digital art. In case this is your first time on the internet, Skillshare is an online learning community that gives you access to thousands of classes from experts in those industries. Maybe you want to learn to write your own queer movie, or master cake decorating, or even learn to draw a cake. There's pretty much classes for any category of creativity and non-creative skills too. So that's how Orange and Egg came to be. The full title of Lisa's course is Kickstart Your Creativity with Procreate, 20 fun drawings for beginners and beyond. And it's been the perfect balance of learning how to use the program with having fun and playing around creatively. Because I know if I just tried to watch someone explaining in detail all the buttons and shortcuts, I'd just switch off. But using the drawing exercises to build up the skills one by one has been perfect for me. And each activity lesson is only like 15 or so minutes long, so it's a great way to stretch your daily creativity muscles. So if you'd like to create your own egg or try any of the thousands of other classes, the first 500 people to use the link in the description will receive 1 month free trial of Skillshare. So get started today. All right, back to the video. Bulging brides. Beauty is happiness. There's this subgenre of reality TV that seemingly originated in the 2000s that is all about brides. These shows range in quality, so Say Yes to the Dress is probably considered the most top tier. It's junk, but like in a way that a cute table that you picked off the side of the street is junk. But then at maximum garbage, there is Bulging Brides, a show about psychologically abusing women so that they become slightly skinnier for their wedding day. This show is the ultimate example of one of the most powerful tools of enforcing our cultural obsession with beauty, by connecting beauty, happiness, and love in a way that cannot be separated. To be beautiful is to be desirable and lovable, and being loved, particularly romantically and sexually, is the key to happiness. In the same way, to be ugly is to be undesired, unlovable, and therefore unhappy. It is to be lonely and pitiable. It is to be unworthy of companionship and care. Bulging Brides ran for 3 seasons. Each episode clocks in at about 21 minutes. I watched a number of these episodes of this televised nightmare, and each one was basically the same. They stick to a very rigid format. In the first minute of each show, we meet our bridal protagonist. These brides are often young and rarely above a size 14, but oh no, their wedding dress, it doesn't fit. And their wedding is nearly here. Doesn't fit can range from the wedding dress doesn't zip up all the way to it just doesn't fit the way that the bride wants it to. And objectively, this is a tailoring issue, right? Like, these brides just need to get a tailor to alter the shape to fit the way that they want to, or find a style that's already the right silhouette for them, or, you know, just buy a bigger dress. But the show takes let's say, a different ethos to this problem. Instead, we get a quick montage of the bride making fun of her own body in the wedding dress, playfully talking about how gross her arms are or how her belly pudges outwards. And then at the minute mark, we meet personal trainer Tommy Europe and nutrition specialist Nadine Bowman. They crash the wedding dress fitting and everyone pretends to be surprised, and Nadine gives the bride a food diary to document everything she eats in a week. We get a terrible theme song, and then we get an at-home section where the bride talks about the wedding and her eating and exercise habits. Remember that food diary? Well, the production team recreates everything that the bride ate in a week in an aisle of shame, where they show the bride the food she ate and give it weird names like Bad Bride's Breakfast and Carb and Cheese-a-thon. Nadine talks about how unhealthy all this food is and really just kind of tries to provoke shame out the contestants. In this one episode, Nadine holds up a bowl of mac and cheese and asks the bride, "What part of your body does this remind you of?" And the bride says, "My butt." In post-production, they've added comical sound effects like, pig oinking noises and screams and yucks.
Let's see what else you've been eating. This stop is called the Chinese Chow Down. We've got the deep fried pork. That's 360 calories per 1 cup, and you had 2 spring rolls, chow mein. Top it all off with a beer, 150 calories.
The shame fest continues with Tommy, who then takes the bride's measurements and weight. He says all of the numbers loudly and with a tone of mild disgust before categorizing the bride's body shape as apple or pear or some other fruit, I guess. I know what you're thinking. How can we make this woman feel worse about herself? Well, after Tommy weighs her, they put her back into the wedding dress, where a stylist makes a bunch of passive-aggressive remarks about how the dress doesn't fit, such as, "Oh, well, that zipper's holding on for dear life." The show specifically uses the language of marriage and weddings throughout this section. Isle of Shame, obviously, and having the bride vow to stick with her new diet and workout routine. The woman is essentially marrying herself, or rather the future skinnier version of herself. And we are not even 10 minutes into this episode, my friends. The bride works out with Tommy, who's doling out tough love, and oh no, she's starting to feel good about herself. We can't have that. Wheel in the 2000s Photoshop, quickly.
In the first 5 years of marriage, women gain on average 15 pounds. And given your current eating patterns, you're on pace to gain 6 pounds a year.
Oh.
So after 4 years of matrimony, this is what you could look like.
I don't want to look like that. I hate it so much. The bride continues to work out. She gets a weigh-in where they mark her progress, and sometimes it'll be like a fun workout class like capoeira or pole dancing. Maybe the stylist pops up for one last bit of flattering fashion advice. There's a final workout challenge where the fiancé joins the bride and they run up a hill together. The episode wraps up with a final weigh-in and dress fitting, with the bride, Thomas and Nadine celebrating the slightly smaller body and how much better the wedding dress now looks. We get some before and after pictures, and then pictures from the actual wedding where the bride gives voiceover about how she's so happy that she'll get the beautiful happily ever after that she always dreamed of, looking so beautiful on her big day.
Every diet ad for Weight Watchers or Slimming World ends with, "And then I got married. I was single and then I got married." It's not overtly said. Sometimes it is at the ending, but it's not overtly said that the singleness is associated with the fatness and the thinness is associated with the marriage. I don't know if you know about anything that happened in my personal life, but do you know how many comments I got this year saying, "Well, it's because you're fat," that my fiance cheated on me? That's funny. I'm a size 20 now. I was a size 20 when I matched with him on a dating app. And he didn't cheat on me for the first 2.5 years. So it definitely wasn't my weight. You deserve to be cheated on because you didn't put enough effort. You let yourself go because they've made an assumption my weight has changed. And of course, he wasn't sexually satisfied or attracted to you.
I think it is so easy to dismiss this show as ridiculous and fatphobic and unhealthy, but let's take a moment and focus on these brides. Why do they want to lose weight? Because the brides in Bulging Brides have found a partner. They are engaged. They want to spend the rest of their lives with them. Many of them are already conventionally attractive and straight-sized to the outside eye. They have the social connection that beauty seems to promise. And still, they have this kind of bridal dysmorphia, like a mismatch between how they perceive how they should look as a bride and then their actual physical appearance. This then contributes to a dissatisfaction with their personal narrative of happiness. There's a lot of overlap in how the different brides in these episodes speak about their bodies in relation to marriage. A lot of them say some version of like, I've been fantasizing about my wedding day since I was a kid, and in my fantasies, I don't look how I look now. Brides are supposed to be beautiful on their wedding day, the most beautiful they'll ever look. Why don't I look like I want to? There has to be more. I have to be more. Whether the idea that ugliness stops you from finding love is true or not doesn't really seem to matter, because we're fed the idea over and over, and it's something that you are meant to overcome as part of your own story or narrative of happiness. A makeover scene is like the rising action of the plot to the finale of the wedding. It's the Cinderella story, and skipping it means that you never get to self-actualize. You just look like your plain old self on the day of your wedding, the culmination of your narrative. What does that mean for the story of your life? Bulging Brides offers a narrative of self-empowerment with beauty as the reward. In aspiring towards beauty, brides have to overcome a series of physical challenges that really symbolize their personal challenges. Many brides categorize themselves as lazy and undisciplined. Nadine and Thomas act as tough love fairy godmothers who use shame instead of magic to help you take control of your appearance by taking back control of your life. Beauty is a sign that you respect yourself and that the world should respect you too. You're a fully realized character, baby. You're powerful.
It helps us feel powerful. It helps us feel like we have some control. We're doing everything right. But the idea that beauty will keep you safe, that heterosexuality will keep you safe, that being cis or being able-bodied will keep you safe is very much a lie. Ugliness is not the villainy. It's not the villain. It is patriarchy that is the villain. It is oppression that is the villain. But patriarchy is in power. Oppressive ideology is in power. Financial power, cultural power, media power, systemic power. And that is very hard to combat, especially when it's so many systems that all work together, so many layers and levels. We can't control it. So we think, what can we control? We can control our face and our body.
In the essay Leisure, Bar and Kale, The Tyranny of the Ideal Woman, Gia Tolentino writes, "Women are genuinely trapped at the intersection of capitalism and patriarchy, two systems that, at their extremes, ensure that individual success comes at the expense of collective morality. And yet, there is enormous pleasure in individual success. It can feel like license and agency to approach an ideal, to find yourself in a good picture on your wedding day, in a flash of identical movement, exemplifying a prototype. There are rewards for succeeding under capitalism and patriarchy. There are rewards even for being willing to work on its terms. There are nothing but rewards at the surface level. The trap looks beautiful. It's well lit. It welcomes you in." It's a powerful message to impress upon people that their outward appearance, which they have very little control over, might be something which keeps them from true happiness. That fear is very real and understandable and seems to be as rampant now as it was in my youth. The comments on this video are so sad. Like, people talking about how they've cried themselves to sleep at the thought of being unlovable because of how they look. There's a power to reaching these beauty standards. To some women, it feels like it's the only true power that they have access to. But it's a false idea of power. It has an expiration date and hard limits, and not everyone has access to it in the first place. Women who don't come close to the physical ideal, who are more than a few centimeters away from fitting into a tiny white dress, can face immense judgment. In the Maintenance Phase podcast episode on Oprah Winfrey, Aubrey Gordon mentions that Oprah faced a lot of skepticism over her relationship with her partner Stedman. Magazine speculated that he only wanted to be with her for her money because he couldn't possibly be in love with a fat woman. Every few years, images of Pierce Brosnan and his wife Keely Shea Smith will go viral. Brosnan will get praised for sticking with his wife throughout her weight gain, implying that Keely's weight gain is a marital obstacle. And anytime a non-skinny woman gets with a cute guy on TV, the whole world loses their minds. The last season of Bridgerton created think pieces like, are we ready for mixed weight relationships? And in Girls, when Lena Dunham's character hooks up with a hot older guy, people criticised her for writing unrealistic plot lines. We can see this attitude projected onto those considered unattractive on social media as well. It happens all the time. It's used as a way to demean and belittle people.
That is true, but you can't use that to hurt me because it's okay.
Really, if you're trying to hurt me, you didn't succeed.
Because if you don't have somebody who's attracted to you, then what's the point of you? 10 Years Younger, The Extremes of Surgery. The final method that I found in these 2000 shows is the normalization of extreme measures to combat any possible sign of perceived ugliness, particularly the rise of surgery and clinical procedures. 10 Years Younger is the blueprint for this rise. A British show that began in 2004, it aimed to make someone look 10 years younger in just 10 days. Every episode of the show begins with the customary 2000s snarky narrator commenting on the life and appearance of the episode participant, while staged footage of them plays as a visual. This might involve them pouring themselves a large measure of alcohol, coughing while smoking, or binging on fast food. The editing plays up each dismembered feature that's a source of insecurity for this person, zooming in on crooked teeth or wrinkles, and cutting to interviews with the participant about how awful they make them look and feel. They then transition into the very scientific method of getting the participant to stand out in public and have 100 strangers guess their age. They just have to stand there while the producer and camera person conduct mini interviews with passers-by who give their guess and explain why. The edit cuts together the most extremes of the clips as a montage before revealing the average age guess. Obviously, this is wildly above their actual age, and we intrinsically understand that this is a very bad thing and this poor person must be helped. Enter our host, Nikki Hamilton-Jones, a stylist who guides the participant through their makeover journey, including telling them the results of the public scrutiny. She is, on the surface, nice, but sort of nice in the way that a straight-talking acquaintance who doesn't care about your feelings might be. She acts as a supportive figure, metaphorically holding their hand as she explains that she knows there's a gorgeous, sexy lady somewhere deep inside and she's going to help bring her out. She wants to help bring back your confidence. And the way she's going to do that? So much surgery. The rest of the show is essentially a series of consultations with plastic surgeons, cosmetic dentists, dermatology clinical centres and more, followed by graphic footage of invasive surgeries and treatments. Between the medical procedures, the participant meets back up with Nikki so she can gush at how incredible the results look and how much better they look. Alongside this are additional meetings with hairdressers and makeup artists to finish up the transformation. And of course, Nikki provides her own style makeover too. Nikki's makeovers are a lot of her smiling while negging the participants, honestly. She'll look at the person in the mirror and giggle and ask, "Now, why are you wearing this sack?" Always pulling at their clothes and tightening them to their figure and telling them that they have a fantastic bum that they should show off. There's so many implications that come across in these segments, where Nikki will describe the person's clothes with this disappointed tone as matronly or baggy and saggy. And what she's really saying is not desirable and sexy to onlookers. The comfort of the subjects is second to encouraging them to wear things that make them look hot, and Nikki actively encourages them to express confidence in these new clothes, but encouraging in a way that doesn't really let them say anything to the contrary. And that confidence is always framed around how men will perceive these women in their new looks. Each episode, of course, ends with the big reveal. The narrator reminds us of how awful the starting point was, and funky music plays to let us know that this new improved version is so much better. They're finally able to look in the mirror at the final look, and Nikki guides them through discussing everything that is better about them now. We then see them go out on the street again and receive a new average age from the public, with the aim to be 10 years younger than the original average guess. This time, Nikki is there with the participant talking directly to the public, giving a more human aspect to the previous guessing game, where the participant would stand some ways off. She then reveals the results, and almost always to great success and shock. Finally, the makeover is revealed to friends and family, who were all interviewed about how amazing and sexy this person now is. The sources of people's ugliness know no limits in this show. In some episodes, we have participants getting weight loss surgery because the size and shape of their body is too ugly. In others, the issue is the female participant being too masculine because that's ugly as well. In the 6th episode of Series 4, for example, our ever-supportive host begins the style makeover segment by telling the participant,
I often meet people who wear bad clothes, but it's not often I meet someone who wears men's clothes.
It is embarrassing.
26 minutes in, we see a new outfit that is so aggressively about what is fashionable in that one moment of women's fashion, as if it's an objective truth of beauty instilled into this woman. I spoke at length in my last video about the white supremacist ideals apparent in many plastic surgery trends over the years, and these are tacitly apparent in this show too. The show originally ran up until 2010, but was rebooted in 2020 with a new presenter, but not necessarily a new attitude. Although many people online seem to perceive the new version as nicer than in the 2000s, I honestly don't see that much of a difference at the heart. To quote new host Cherry Healey directly from her own intro on the show, while some people are blessed with amazing genes, most of us need a helping hand to look and feel good. The show is the same rough format, with this same idea of looking good and feeling good being intrinsically linked, including the idea that signs of aging are inherently bad and that outside interventions are totally normal, even expected things to consider. And the concept seems to be maybe even more about how exciting all these new treatments and machines are, all the modern ways that we can alter our flawed genetics to attain what is considered beauty in that moment. One review, when the reboot first aired, explained the main difference from the old show. Much is made of the fact that the cosmetic interventions are now non-surgical, but non-surgical does not exclude all manner of injections, plumps and peels, not to mention credulous claims made for an algae face mask that should raise eyebrows, Botox allowing. At one point, Sarah is semi-scolded by the cosmetic physician for being very naturally expressive, and that's what's causing the lines. Good tip there, ladies. If you want to stay forever young, simply avoid expressing any human emotion. I watched so many episodes and clips of this show while researching for this video, and I quickly noticed something. There are, as far as I'm aware, no people of colour in the first 5 seasons of the show as contestants. I did find a couple of examples and episodes after the show was rebooted in 2020. One was this woman, Myra. I found it very interesting how they dealt with balancing the mainstream white-centric beauty standards with non-white participants. During Myra's hair makeover, she talks about how every morning I apologise to my husband about her natural hair as a black woman, insisting I hadn't considered myself as beautiful. When talking about what she wants for her new style, she says, I want to look professional, powerful. And the hairdresser immediately interprets that as, we're talking super slick. The show immediately and unquestioningly leans into this narrow view of what beauty even is. Even when participants are permitted to engage with these biases on screen, their concerns are quickly dismissed by the hosts or expert guests on the show. Another participant, for example, explained, being a woman of colour, it makes it more difficult knowing what tones to use. When discussing her uncertainty around makeup, the response? Makeup is for everyone. There are shades for everyone. The link between youth and beauty is nothing new, but I'd argue that the expectation to act on this link is higher than ever online. Cosmetic surgery is definitely more normalized than it was even when these shows were airing, with catchy names for new types of procedure, for new types of perfection, from BBLs to fox eye surgery. The market to reverse visible aging specifically has grown at a remarkable speed. According to data gathering and visualization site Statista, the global market for anti-aging products was valued at around $47 billion in 2023 and is expected to increase to nearly $80 billion by the beginning of the next decade. This market includes topical products that we're used to, like anti-aging eye creams, but also all kinds of gadgets to prevent wrinkle formation or which claim to stave off jowls, and of course the rise of preventative cosmetic procedures too. Prevention Botox and filler being two of the most seemingly widespread right now. Where before Botox was reserved for those already in middle age at least, there are now countless examples of young Gen Z creators posting about their Botox routines and future plans to ensure that they stay looking as young as possible for as long as possible. Because aging is ugly and ugliness is to be feared. There is something so deeply unsettling but utterly telling about the focus on these early preventative measures being specifically for the aesthetics of youth. It doesn't feel like this is truly anti-aging, it's anti-looking old. These are all methods of preventing the outward appearance of getting older, but nothing to do with the mental, physical, or health-related aspects of aging, which is surely more important and impactful. There are so many posts and videos online discussing how people can make themselves look better that will throw out, like, dye your hair a more flattering shade, alongside get filler to balance your mouth shape, or a rhinoplasty will correct your nose size in relation to your other features really well. Requiring surgery to be considered beautiful is capitalism at its most dystopian. It's hardly a hot take at this point to say that along with 2000s fashion, 2000s body issues are making a resurgence. I mean, it makes sense. In the 2000s, the thin body was the fashion more than the clothes themselves. Red carpets were chock full of ultra low-rise jeans and heroin chic silhouettes, ordinary everyday clothes being worthy of these spaces meant for the height of fashion, because the clothes weren't what was really on show. Trend cycles, what is in fashion or not, used to be years apart. With the rise of micro-trends, online niches, and fashion influencers on sites that encourage new posts multiple times a day, the trend cycle has shrunk massively. These fast changes should allow us to expose the changeable and subjective lie that is objective beauty that we need to strive towards, but instead we have cosmetic and surgical trends showcased through these public faces. For many people, the attitude is, well, if you had the money, why wouldn't you? I feel like this is worth pausing and thinking about for a second, really thinking about this. The idea that the only reason not to get surgery, or at least injectables or one of these non-invasive procedures to alter your body and face, is just cost. The assumption that the pursuit of beauty is mandatory within your means. How to look good naked, the alternative. The 2000s seemed destined to be the site of nothing but mean-spirited and shaming shows, using punishing makeovers for entertainment. But then, out of the haze, came one gay man to the rescue. Gok Wan burst onto our screens as the host of the show How to Look Good Naked. A clickbait title, but full of promise. This was a British makeover show which first aired in 2006, centering around an insecure woman who goes on a journey to be more confident in her body. She gets flattering clothing and underwear, a makeover, a sexy photo shoot, photos of which get displayed in public, and passers-by positively comment on how beautiful she is, and it makes the woman realise that her perception of herself doesn't match the public perception. She was beautiful this whole time. She just needed a fairy gay mother to tell her that she too could be fierce. At the end of the episode, the woman walks down a runway in front of her friends and family, often in a shopping centre for some reason, and then she confidently strips naked on stage. So actually, maybe it wasn't a clickbait title after all. They actually do get naked in the show. These makeovers weren't about weight loss. They weren't about cosmetic surgery. They weren't about pointing out flaws or selling diet plans or punishing workout routines. The women in the show weren't shamed for their bodies or encouraged to change them at all. It was about learning to see yourself as beautiful, to feel confident in your own skin. This show is feel-good and heartwarming and inspirational, and when I first started researching this video, I added it to this list as a sort of like series that might be good to use as a counter to these alternatives that we've been talking about from the 2000s. This is the kind of show that we should be pushing for, right? You don't need to change, you're already beautiful. Except I think it does us all a disservice to stop here, because the premise of this show that every woman is beautiful, isn't it ultimately just reinforcing the idea that our sense of self-worth, our worth in general, is indeed tied to our appearance? Instead of working to expand our cultural ideas of what is seen as beautiful, do we need to go further and dismantle them entirely? Uplifting people's confidence around their own desirability and beauty as individuals is a powerful thing, but what happens if we examine or even reject the concept of ugliness and beauty itself? More importantly, what if we reject the moral implications attached to it? Although social media is full of negative comments, there are also so many examples of people trying to uplift others by reassuring them. And how they reassure them is by talking about how they're beautiful and desirable after all. I think this well-meaning instinct to protest, like, no, you're beautiful, don't say that about yourself, it's not just about physical appearance, but is fueled by the implications attached to ugliness that permeate our society and that we are all aware of. That sinking feeling that so many of us get when someone calls themselves ugly or unattractive, that desire to correct and reassure them, it isn't just about appearance. The impact that ugliness logically has on relationships, work, even someone's inner morality is tied up with there too, right? Like, it's not just don't call yourself ugly, it's don't call yourself gross or unlovable or undeserving. Because to us, don't they mean the same thing? Beauty isn't just placed at the level of importance of these other factors. It's seen as intrinsically linked to them. Who deserves romantic happiness? Who is a trustworthy person? Who is approachable or put together or good? To be ugly, much of our culture suggests to us, is to be unworthy of these things. And so when we say everyone is beautiful in their own way, is that based on a genuine belief in universal beauty, or a genuine belief that everyone is worthy of the things that ugliness might keep from us?
At 15 years old, I decided I was ugly, and then I realized ugly people get married and ugly people live fulfilled lives. Now, when I tell that on a stage, I will say, excuse the crassness of the thought, I was 15 years old, and I would phrase that very differently now. But it's because, like, in the world of body positivity now, we've only really got as far as saying everyone's beautiful. Even me saying you are more than a body is a bit too far. But me actually saying, oh, ugly people live fulfilled lives and get married and have successful jobs all the time is a really taboo thing to say. But ultimately, that was the thought that liberated me.
And so How to Look Good Naked doesn't challenge the idea that ugly equals bad. Instead, it tries to expand the definition of beauty. If everyone is beautiful, then no one is ugly. And if no one is ugly, then no one is bad. By failing to challenge that final notion that unattractiveness is bad inherently, How to Look Good Naked ultimately upholds the systems that it seems to be trying to critique. Ugliness and beauty are moving targets. Inevitably, we are all going to become ugly at some point or be perceived as ugly by some people, whether because of aging or weight changes or any number of factors. We need to be able to perceive ourselves and other people as ugly and valuable, ugly and good, ugly and worthy. But what would that look like? Is it possible to build a post-beauty society? Ugly liberation. So the place we're starting from here is that the everyone is beautiful positivity type movements for acceptance aren't enough. Because one, it doesn't break free of that system. In fact, it reinforces that beauty is important rather than abandoning the idea that beauty is a thing that makes us valuable or should have any impact at all. And two, it's a sentiment which creates a supposed equality of beauty which doesn't exist in reality right now, with how people are treated differently due to their appearance. So what is the alternative? For lack of a better term, it feels like what I'm searching for is ugly liberation or ugly neutrality. And I did search. I tried using the language of other appearance-based movements, fat lib or body positivity, for example, and replacing those focuses with the word ugly. And basically nothing comes up when you search. And I think at first that feels understandable. Ugly just seems different to these other descriptors of appearance, right? But why? The more you look at other body acceptance movements and throughout what society has told you ugliness means, the more it doesn't feel like it should be different after all. I wasn't the only one struggling to find an existing ugly liberation movement or even framework. Two academic researchers in the UK put out a call for participants in a forum called The Crip, the Fat and the Ugly in an Age of Austerity, Resistance, Reclamation and Affirmation in 2018. What they found was a distinct lack of entries in the ugly category, saying, "We learned across this forum that while we may be ready for the revolutionary politics of crip and fat, ugly has got some way to go. It's become clear to us that reclaiming, respecting and loving ugly is an incomplete, but we hope an emerging radical project that can enable connection and build coalition across marginalised people's social movements." There are absolutely people talking about these ideas, but it feels like we don't yet have a larger movement that might break out into wider spaces and audiences who might need to hear it, in the way that things like body positivity or fat liberation have. Vanessa absolutely feels like one of those voices, with her amazing book and website Reclaiming Ugly. There's also the work of Mia Mingus, who gave a speech in 2011, which I've seen referenced multiple times by others, called Moving Towards the Ugly, A Politic Beyond Desirability, which was delivered at the Femmes of Colour Symposium. Plus so many individuals posting their own frustrations on TikTok or Reddit on Instagram that are hidden in private stories or unpredictable algorithms, not quite pulling enough people together at once who might form this very real need into a collective whole. Ironically, I think part of the reason that this hasn't broken into a mainstream conversation is the very shame and dehumanization that we've talked about today. A side effect of being or even feeling ugly is a sense of insecurity around your own self. In that position, is it any wonder that people feeling this way aren't collectively declaring their own worth in a wide public forum? But existing movements may already hold the keys to what a widespread concept of ugly liberation could look like. Another prominent voice talking about ugliness is Deshaun Harrison, whose work leaning into insecurity and ugliness as an essential politic was published online in 2020 and actively connects the ideas of fatness, desirability, and ugliness, specifically addressing this question of insecurity. For as long as I can remember, I've been taught that insecurities are something to be afraid of, to be ashamed of, to run away from. Taught that the way I felt about my body and my being was my own moral failing, and therefore my own responsibility to hold. I've been socialized into believing that if I was insecure, then I was weak, incapable, or ugly, and that all of those things were bad things to be. I internalized that. I believed for a long time that I was ugly and incapable and weak, and I internalized the shame and fear associated with those things. It was when I developed a politic around fatness, desirability, and ugliness that I began to form a different relationship to the aforementioned terms and the reality of living with them. So what might acts of ugly liberation or looks neutrality look like? Could it mean not taking action to improve or maintain our appearance by altering it to match an idealized standard of beauty, freeing up time and money previously spent on products and treatments and processes, not engaging with the marketing push for anti-aging, anti-wrinkle, anti-fat, anti-blemish, anti-marks promises to boost company profits with new insecurities to be solved with their particular products? Maybe we have to actively push back before a kind of neutrality is achieved, to engage directly with how arbitrary these ideas around ugliness and beauty really are. Is there potential in the idea of this TikTok, for example, turning the tools of beautification on their head to expose and ridicule their proper use?
Some guy said no one would ever love me because of my yellow dolphin teeth, weird shaped nostrils, and creepy eyes. I love that. Here's the final look. I think I'm giving creepy eyes, weird nostrils, and yellow dolphin teeth to the extreme.
Maybe we need to look at the ways different cultures engage with beauty to see if there might already be alternative ideas that can be explored here too. In Emma Dabiri's book, Disobedient Bodies, she talks about concepts of beauty from her Yoruba heritage, like the understanding of iwa or inner beauty being paramount. Character is beauty, as their proverb goes. Your words and deeds, your interactions with others, those are a real source of beauty. She also points out the potential of onsen and hammam culture in places like Japan, Turkey, and Morocco, communal sites which might give us a way to experience the power of being casual and comfortable with nakedness in a non-sexual context, as well as the familiarity it brings to a wide variety of body types, especially intergenerational bodies. And there are, of course, existing movements which engage with bodily liberation. I've mentioned them before: body neutrality, fat lib. What lessons and ideas could be taken from their legacy and history? What language and imagery might we use as key components of a new way of talking about ugliness? Mingness's 2011 speech, for example, opens up the idea of magnificence as one option that encompasses the prior experiences of ugliness with the possibility of a future beyond that negative treatment. The magnificence of bodies that have been coded not just as undesirable and ugly, but unhuman. The significance of bodies that are understanding gender in far more complex ways than I could explain in an hour, moving beyond a politic of desirability to loving the ugly, respecting ugly for how it has shaped us and been exiled, seeing its power and magic, seeing the reasons it has been feared, seeing it for what it is, some of our greatest strength. She expanded on what that positivity behind ugliness might look like, not just as a theory or belief to push towards, but a reality already. Ways the experience of ugliness is already beyond what we have been taught. In this case, specifically railing against one of the tactics I talked about in the Bulging Bride segment of this video, the lie that only beauty is lovable and desirable. Ugliness is a pathway to intimacy. You can't have intimacy without trust, and you can't have trust without vulnerability. In order to be vulnerable, you have to reveal parts of yourself that are dismissed as capital U, ugly. I give these initial suggestions not as an exhaustive list, but as a provocation. But I'm not ignorant of the fact that engaging with these kinds of practices is hard, actually. In her piece, Not Everyone Has to Be Beautiful and That's Okay, writer Kaylee Donaldson explains that mental barrier. You can practically see the squirm of awkwardness on people's faces when you reassure them that you're honestly okay with not being called pretty. Most of the time, they either rush to reject my statement or they think I'm fishing for compliments. The third option, that I'm okay with saying what I do about myself, is seldom considered. Indeed, it never seems to be an option in the first place. If people are discomforted by the idea of someone calling themselves ugly at all, if our instincts are to rush to deny their reality, it will be psychologically hard to shift those instincts, as well as our deeper thoughts and engagement with the topic. Our economic system, which rules so much of our lives, has a fear of ugliness baked in. It's an easily exploitable lack or need that can make people a lot of money. As Dr. McCann, a cultural studies lecturer at the University of Melbourne, succinctly puts it, to suggest that there are universal ideals of beauty that transcend culture completely fails to comprehend the way that ideals of beauty have been constructed in order to be sold. Beauty makes us consume, but also makes us consumable. To reject that is powerful, but for good reason. It's so much a part of the background of our lives. There is real fear underlying all of this that I think boils down to the idea that ugliness and connection are incompatible with each other. The fear of ugliness in oneself is also the fear of loneliness. The experience of desirability not as a fixed aesthetic state, but the key to unlock stability, happiness, companionship, and love. While researching for this video, I found this everywhere in cries for help and reassurance all over the internet. The fear is so powerful that even when people have this loving romantic love already, like the brides in Bulging Brides or Myra in 10 Years Younger, who felt the need to apologize to her own loving husband for how she looked, they can't help but doubt. I met my husband Keith on a trade publication. For the first time in my life, I felt attractive because he made me feel that way. He told me repeatedly how he loved the way I looked, and still does. It's taken me 18 years and 4 children to believe him. And even now, I think he just might be one of those rare men who is more interested in inner beauty. The idea of ugly liberation is the idea that we can free ourselves from this fear by showing there is nothing to fear at all. But individual fears are not the only consideration here. It may not have escaped you that all of the people that I have mentioned in this segment as being important voices in this space, Vanessa, Michelle, Mia Mingus, and Deshaun Harrison, are people of colour. Most of them are queer, most of them are disabled. This isn't a coincidence. Our concept of what is ugly cannot be separated from these other aspects of marginalization and liberation. It's for that reason that I think a key component of any discussion on ugly liberation or neutrality has to be uglification, a term that Rochelle is a genuine expert on. Her website Reclaim Ugly describes the term and its impact. Uglification consists of personal and cultural beliefs, behaviors, practices, and laws that dehumanize people as ugly, undesirable, immoral, and unworthy. It feeds, maintains, and depends on oppression, such as lookism, racism, ableism, sexism, and homo, trans, fat, and xenophobia. Unchecked, it facilitates, normalizes, and validates hatred, childhood bullying, workplace exclusion, criminalization, medical neglect, violence, exploitation, and more. Ugly is a thing that is done to you. Uglification is a behavioral practice that we are socialized and coerced into. Uglification is a cultural and systemic pastime that was created to justify exclusion, oppression, colonization, slavery, incarceration, and so many other forms of violence. This reframing of ugly as a verb, something that is done to you rather than an adjective, something that you inherently are, is incredibly powerful. But vitally, it is a much more accurate way of talking about the realities of ugliness today. In some cases, uglification is a deliberate tactic to make marginalized groups seem dangerous, undesirable, or inhuman even. Think about the images of blackness constructed in minstrel shows, or the exaggerated, often animalistic anti-Semitic cartoons of the 30s. In other cases, existing prejudices distort marginalized bodies and behavior into ugliness because of the disgust already focused on that group. A trans woman, for example, may be desired by a cis straight man when he thinks that she is also cis. But when her trans marginalization becomes known, she becomes uglified in his eyes, suddenly now an object of disgust and abuse, and in some cases even escalating to deadly violence, even though nothing about her or the way she looks has changed. She didn't become ugly, she became uglified. Seeing ugliness through this lens exposes even more clearly how subjective, flawed, and ultimately harmful it is. It's a social construct that is forced upon someone rather than an embodied truth. The 2000s TV shows that I've looked at today are essentially internationally broadcasted uglification. I think it also exposes how understandable it is that many marginalized people in particular seek to attain beauty and reject ugliness. Mingus gave an interview in 2018 about that 2011 speech, expanding on her ideas. It's really hard and it frustrates me every day that the queer community is obsessed with being desirable, but I also understand why people chose those things. There are so many reasons that we choose them. Our survival, our pain, our trauma, the capacity it takes to actually be with undesirability and ugliness is really hard. I think part of what I was trying to say in that talk is that there are so many people who can't choose, and that choice is an illusion for so many people. It's everything I just spoke about, which makes it hard as individuals to accept and engage with ugly liberation ideas. But there's also added systemic layers on top for many marginalized people that make it feel incompatible with their existing communities or collective happiness. Ugliness and disability, for example, are intimately linked in many ways. Ugliness, like disability, is something that in our current culture becomes all but inevitable as we age. Consider wrinkles, balding, sagging, into tooth loss, mobility issues, incontinence. Ugliness, age, and disability fold into each other. The emotional feeling of grossness or disgust that comes with ugliness parallels that same feeling when faced with the realities of disability by many people even today. Vanessa and I spoke about how that connection was a stumbling block even for her.
So one example I think of embracing ugliness is choosing your comfort. How do you feel comfortable in your body? So I just turned 40. I just survived cancer. And a thing that I have realized is, oh my gosh, how vulnerable am I going to be?
As vulnerable as you feel comfortable being.
So I just turned 40. I just survived cancer. And in the process of having cancer, I could not control my urine. And I couldn't always control when I had to go number 2. Like I had diarrhea. Like these medications do really intense things to your body. And one day I was so sick, I kept vomiting, I kept pooping on myself. And my mother said, "Baby, I'm gonna bring you some adult diapers." And I said, "No! Do not do that. I will not wear," my mind went to all of these ableist places, and I uglified my body and I uglified accessibility. And for a couple of weeks, I continued to go through multiple sets of underwear a day because of my illness. And finally I said, no, I'm going to choose comfort. I'm going to choose accessibility. And I let myself put on that adult diaper. And when I tell you it transformed my experience, it made life and living when I was sick, when I was struggling, so much more accessible. I had to stop uglifying myself. And there were a couple of things that led me to uglify my need for that.
Vanessa became something of an overnight topic of public discourse after finding out a man had shared a photo of her online and had found that photo by searching Google images of ugly black woman. Subsequently, she changed her social media handles to @theuglyBlackWoman. She said the experience with that man finding and using her photo exposed the dehumanization of ugliness to her, and she wanted to give that concept of the ugly black woman a real, living, breathing face for people to see. Her ownership over the label ugly, however, ended up with critics in places that she hadn't necessarily expected.
What I realized eventually was, even though I was fostering conversations, I was hurting entirely too many other Black women by calling myself the ugly Black woman. I was getting so many messages from people asking me, "Sis, why would you do this? Why do you believe this about yourself?" Other people thought that I was some kind of white supremacist or some kind of man making a fake account and trying to belittle Black women. So I thought, okay, the way that I'm doing this is impactful in some cases and harmful in others, and I chose to shift it, because I didn't want to hurt the people that I wanted to heal. I didn't want to hurt the people that I wanted to uplift and that I wanted to talk to.
That's a difficult thing to grapple with, right? If ugly is a subjective concept, which has been created in the modern US and UK along the lines of white supremacy, cis and heteronormativity and ableist frameworks, then does accepting the label of ugly for yourself as a black or queer or disabled person in some way also mean legitimizing that exclusionary concept of beauty and ugliness? If you say, yeah, I'm ugly, and what? As a black woman, when your perceived ugliness is potentially rooted in features that are connected to your blackness, does this necessarily mean that you are saying that black and ugly are in some ways synonymous? Or is it enough to acknowledge that you are neutral about being seen as ugly within social norms and standards, but actively fight those standards only and specifically because they are rooted in anti-blackness, not because you yourself believe them? Beauty has been part of black political and liberation discussions from the outset. The Black is Beautiful movement in the 60s and 70s, for example, looked to expand the white-centric concepts of beauty in the US at the time. It remains hugely influential, with a legacy stretching far beyond the magazine pages. But is it that the politics of beauty and ugliness are inherently key to marginalized liberation, or merely a tool to be utilized on either side of the fight because of how powerful our obsession with beauty and ugliness is? This tension, these questions, they aren't new. All the way back in the 1970s, in the midst of the Black is Beautiful discussion, Toni Morrison wrote in the New York Times that the phrase was an accurate but wholly irrelevant observation. The phrase was nevertheless a full confession that white definitions were important to us. Having to counteract them meant they were significant, and that the quest for physical beauty was both a good and worthwhile pursuit. Once we had convinced everybody, including ourselves, of our beauty, then what? Things would change? We could assert ourselves, make demands? White people presumably had no objection to killing beautiful people. In an interview with Mingus in 2018, the journalist asked her, why are we so fixated on calling marginalized people beautiful when that's not changing our material circumstances? And that's a valid question, but I think the concept of beauty and our material circumstances are not necessarily separate issues. Calling someone beautiful may well be a useless act of virtue signaling, but actively engaging with questioning beauty itself is deeply connected to all liberation discussions for me. As Mingus explains so aptly in her keynote, building my gender, my anything around desirability or beauty is not just an ableist notion of what's important, but will always keep me chasing what doesn't want me. Will always keep me hurling swords at the very core of me. Being seen as beautiful might be a short-term balm or an individual triumph, but at what cost? I came into this video while still working on my last one around disfigurement, imagining that I'd end it with a strong rallying cry for an ugly liberation movement to emerge. And I do still think that the world would be a better place if it would. But as soon as I sat down to really think about the topic and shape my research, that strong rallying cry began to, as so many topics do when I write thousands of words on them, become more nuanced and complex. I don't doubt, hearing Vanessa talk about the reactions from other Black women to her even just changing her Instagram handle name, that none of them will be able to come into these discussions without racialized trauma specifically connected to the word ugly. So I suppose the question then becomes, how do we create not just an idea of ugly liberation, but a compassionate and intersectional path to get there, in a way that doesn't accidentally have us be the ones uglifying other people in the process? Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of the stuff I've covered in this video in the comments. Once more, please do check out the poster if you're someone who's interested in queer movies and stunning illustrations. And if you would like to help support me make videos like this in the future, then please also check out my Patreon and Ko-fi. There are some really cool perks that come with becoming a Patreon supporter, including access to my Discord, recommendation lists, personalized care packages, as well as Patreon exclusive extra videos where I essentially talk about all the things that I didn't have time to put into these videos on the main channel. So if that sounds up your street, then please do check it out. And until I see you next time, bye.